Welcome to our last day of Suburban Action Week for our Ask an Engineer session, How a Project Gets Built. I'm Maggie Schwinski from the Active Transportation Alliance, and Brian Larson is with me here today. He was a former intern of ours and a current UIC student studying planning. We'll both be doing any Q&A, helping with Q&A for this session. So I want to introduce Mike Korr, who is our presenter today. He is an engineer and the president of Christopher B. Burke Engineering. And after or during his presentation, if you have any questions, please add them to the chat. And he's actually going to pause partway through the presentation to address any questions anyone has, because I feel like we have an engineer here and he has a lot of knowledge. So tap into that knowledge. So ask whatever any question you have, and either you can unmute yourself or use the chat, but I will turn it over to Mike to get started.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. As Maggie said, this is Ask an Engineer. So I have probably a 15 or 20-minute introduction with slides, and then I'll pause and take some questions. And if there aren't any questions, I'll continue through discussing specific projects and some of the issues we've had with those projects. So I'll dive right into it. My name's Mike Korr. I'm with Burke Engineering. I'm a graduate of the Southern Illinois University School of Mining Engineering. I did a short stint at another firm, and I've been with Chris Burke Engineering since 1993. And was promoted to president about a year ago. A little bit about Burke Engineering. We're a large local engineering firm. We have about 200 professionals. 90% of our work is for government entities, tollway, IDOT, the counties, municipalities. We're village engineer for 27 municipalities. So I think we have a unique perspective on what it takes to get projects through, representing a local public agency. We do offer a full range of other engineering issues. But today I'll primarily be talking about how to get a project through the federal process. An interesting thing about Burke Engineering, we have a very robust bike to work program. We're one of the very few platinum level bicycle-friendly businesses in the Illinois. We started our program in 2006. About 180 employees have commuted by bicycle over 400,000 miles. So, our engineers are out there on the streets and utilizing some of the infrastructure that we're building. So now on to the process. Project delivery. As I said, most of the what I'll be discussing today is getting a project through the federal process. So the projects always start with a concept, or pre-phase 1 engineering. That generally takes 0 to 6 months. Then we get into the actual planning of the project, and I'll get into each of these in a little more detail in the following slides. But planning consists of the phase 1 engineering. That can take anywhere from 6 to 12 months. Following that is design engineering, which is also referred to as phase 2 engineering, another 9 to 18 months. And then finally, we're into construction. We're actually building things. I've said in many of the presentations this week, and I think the group in general acknowledges how long it takes to get one of these projects through the federal process. This just kind of lays it out and the steps. So pre-phase 1 engineering is basically your concept development. You're determining the location of the project, the limits, what you're trying to accomplish. And I think most importantly, you're trying to find a lead agency. Who's going to take the lead in building that project? And then how is it going to get funded? And how are you going to fund the different aspects of that project, including engineering? Next, we get into phase 1 engineering. To me, this is by far the most critical part of any engineering process. This takes the sketch of what you want to accomplish, develops a purpose and need, evaluates all of the potential environmental impacts, determines the alignment, figures out if you're going to need any right-of-way or special permits. All of your stakeholder coordination takes place during this phase. Public involvement takes place during this phase. And if you're fortunate enough to get through all of this at the end, you have what's referred to as design approval. And that's basically approval from IDOT, allowing you to move into the next phase of the engineering, which is the actual development of plans, specifications, and estimates. So once you get through phase one, it's really implementation. At that point, you're just developing plan sheets, developing specifications, cost estimates, getting your plans reviewed, getting permits. And at the end of this phase, that's what the contractors bid on. As I said, this takes another 6, 9, 12 months. And the contractors bid on these projects through IDOT when they put out their lettings. Then finally, we're into phase 3 engineering, which is when the contractor's actually constructing the improvement that we've designed. And there's usually an engineer on site who's there to observe construction, measure quantities, monitor the schedule, to help. Utility conflicts are a huge issue with all construction, so they coordinate those, coordinate with the public, and then finally close out the project. So at the end of this whole process, hopefully you've got ped and bike infrastructure in the ground. That's the general process. Maggie's also asked me to speak specifically on a few other things. State and county coordination. The process I described is for a local agency, a municipality, building a road, or I'm sorry, a ped or bike facility on one of their roads. So they have jurisdiction. However, as we all know, many of the projects that we want to construct are along state or county roads, which is fine. But sometimes, in addition to the process that I laid out previously, the jurisdiction may have more strict design criteria and maybe require additional reviews during both phase 1 and phase 2. So it's just another wrinkle in the project delivery, and a different reviewing group from IDOT or the county. Good news, IDOT's recently updated its requirements for incorporating bike and ped accommodations into their improvements. I won't get into this in great detail, but I think through the efforts of ATA and Ride Illinois, coordinating with IDOT, they made it a lot easier for when IDOT is leading a project for them to include bicycle and pedestrian accommodations. So, the warrants are, if there's a planned bikeway adjacent to the route, then they need to include it. If there's a significant bike volume, they need to include it. If there's destinations along there that people on bikes would like to go to, they should include it. If it provides access, special access. For instance, if there's a road that goes over a railroad or a river and there's no other crossings, if they're going to reconstruct that bridge, they should provide ped and bike accommodations. So I think this is great. Great news for everybody who's trying to build ped and bike facilities. What do we use to design our ped and bike facilities? IDOT has a very robust and new Chapter 17 that they require us to use, pages and pages of criteria, but very well thought out. The new guidance is very good. We use the AASHTO guide for the development of bicycle facilities. That's probably my go-to guide for shared use paths, side paths, any type of path adjacent to a roadway. The NACTO bikeway design guide and FHWA separated bike lane guide are mainly for urban bike lanes, things like that. And they've come a long way. That FHWA publication is very good. And then finally, IDOT developed a memorandum called TRA 23, and that provides guidance for how we get these facilities across roadways at unsignalized locations. If you can't get to a signalized intersection to cross a busy road and you don't have $2 million laying around for an overpass, what are the tools you use to get bikes and peds across the road? The biggest challenges to me with these types of projects are railroads. Any type of railroad coordination takes a very long time, separate agreements, and they're not real accommodating. ComEd is a great partner for bike paths, but the process takes a long time. And when you combine ComEd's process with the federal process for land acquisition, it can add significant time to a project. Non-signalized road crossings are a big challenge. Wetland and stream crossings are a challenge. Right-of-way acquisition adds 18 months to any project minimum. Following the federal process for right-of-way acquisition, you have to prepare plats, appraisals have to be done, review appraisals have to be done, negotiations have to be done, all with the IDOT review, all in accordance with federal procedures. And the soft costs alone for the right-of-way, before you even talk about the cost of the land, can be $10,000 to $15,000 per parcel and add 18 months to a project. 4F properties, those are properties that are park district or forest preserve district where they're not a participant in the project, and there's a special document that needs to be prepared. Environmental and cultural clearances for all projects occur during phase 1. IDOT does the environmental surveys, both biologic and cultural. We had a recent project where they found some archaeological resources that changed alignments of a bike path, 18 months after we're into this process. So those things kind of hit you out of nowhere. And the big thing is project momentum. And I think this is where advocacy really helps. We're engineers and we go through our process. Our biggest interaction with the public is during phase 1, where we'll have public information meetings, maybe a public hearing, maybe some stakeholder involvement. And then we get design approval and, we go away for 2 years or 18 months. And it's almost unfathomable to the public that we're still working on this thing. So if advocacy groups can step up and say, hey, I've noticed on ATA's website before, there's little updates on projects, DPRT is requesting funding or Skokie Valley Trails filling a gap or whatever it might be. But I think things like that really help keep the project momentum going, because many of these projects last through different staff, different administration, et cetera. So this is about the halfway point of my presentation. The remainder of my presentation is all about specifics of projects. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to take those now or keep going through the projects. You guys tell me.
Well, we actually do have a couple questions already from our attendees. And the first one actually kind of segues into what you were talking about regarding right-of-ways acquisition. And this is from John. And they're wondering if on existing roadways, how much more expensive is it to modify for bikes and pedestrians? They often feel like it's a ready-made excuse to avoid modifications.
I think that's a very good question. And I think part of what's happening is, we hear about these projects, you get plans, IDOT's going to construction with, pick your state route. There's no ped or bike facilities. And at this point, we're trying to add them. Well, the chances are that project has already gone through, 5 years of planning under previous criteria where they didn't add peded bike accommodations. And now at this late date to add right-of-way becomes very cumbersome, and could take years. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you can start to plan for that acquisition, very soon after phase one, it's a legitimate ask. If you're asking to accommodate ped and bike facilities when the project's out for letting, and it requires right-of-way, it's probably a non-starter. And I think we're just flushing some of those older projects out that don't have ped and bike accommodations planned for. Hopefully that answers the question.
Mike, so ideally, is it best for advocates to get involved before or during phase one engineering, or like right immediately after, to have more say in what goes into the project?
I think even before the project is a glimmer in somebody at IDOT's eye. If you can work with communities like you do, Maggie, and develop a complete streets plan or a bike plan, and you show a side path along Irving Park Road in that municipal plan, and then IDOT comes along and decides they're going to improve Irving Park Road, well, guess what? There's a planning document out there that documents that the municipality wants a side path on Irving Park Road. So they need to consider that when they do their phase one engineering. So it becomes part of the project from the very initiation, rather than somewhere down the road where, frankly, right-of-way can be used as a fairly good excuse for not adding stuff at a later date.
Got it. Thank you. So Fatima just has a comment where she's loving this training. So thank you, Mike. And Ben asks, what trends in bike paths and routes have you seen since, in your experience working as an engineer?
I guess what I'm noticing more and more lately, years and years and years ago, the city of Chicago started with just bike lanes, right? There was no buffers, there was no protection. They just went out and striped 5-foot bike lanes. They started it, a movement. And from that point on, I think the facilities have gotten more and more robust and safer for cyclists. They include buffers, they include protection. The side paths are crossing at safer locations, either signals, overpasses, or well thought out mid-block crossings. So I think in general, everything I'm seeing is positive for peds and cyclists.
So you were mentioning utilizing existing planning documents as a way to promote that initial contact and inclusion of bike and ped facilities. Sue Montgomery is wondering if, like, the initial contact with an engineering firm has to come from a municipality. Can it come from a group like a local bike club if they're interested in adopting a similar sort of expansion and inclusion of bike and ped facilities?
Absolutely, it can come from the bike club. You just have to be looking for opportunities where a public information meeting is advertised, or the outreach from IDOT or whoever's leading the project is occurring, so that you can be there and be very clear about what you're looking for, with that project. So absolutely, yes. Bike clubs are great for projects. We did the two-way protected bike lane in Evanston along Northwestern's campus, which is a great facility. I was the lead engineer on that, and I was actually leaning toward one-way protected on both sides of the road. That was actually my recommendation. But the Evanston Bike Club and the student bike club and the student body said, listen, the students aren't going to cross the road to go south, so we want this thing all on one side of the road. which I had concerns about, but that was absolutely the right call. So that advocacy and that outreach from the bike clubs and the university changed my perspective and the decision on how we were going to build the thing.
Great. Question from Robert. Our village, Villa Park, is planning a trail to connect 3 trails into town. Is there a minimum width recommended per the sources that you mentioned for a bike and pedestrian path?
Yes, the recommended minimum width is 10 feet. And the edge of that 10-foot path should be located 5 feet from minimum from the face of the curb. We've had some luck going down to 8 feet in certain locations to avoid tree impacts or right-of-way impacts. But usually for short stretches, 200 to 300 feet of 8-foot path and then widen back out to 10 foot. We've also been successful moving the bike path a little closer to the road. But when you do, you need some type of barrier to keep the cyclists from exiting the bike path and going into the traffic.
P. Smitty is wondering if there's a standard design and markings for on-street rail crossings where the rail is not at a 90-degree angle.
There is no standard that I'm aware of, but I have seen signs where, they show the danger, sharp angle ahead on a warning sign. I think you would use a standard MUTCD warning sign with a creative logo showing that sharp angle. I haven't seen anything on the ground, but I suppose you could do the same thing, warning ahead. That goes back to the first point on the slide I'm showing. Generally, the railroads, everything that's constructed or everything that occurs in their right of way, which, call it 80 feet or 100 feet, is designed and constructed by the railroad themselves. So when you're bringing a facility to a railroad, you're basically telling them, hey, I want to cross here. And you provide a preliminary plan and they take it from there. And they're not real progressive when it comes to signage or pavement marking. They'll put up their traditional crossbucks and signals, but anything innovative is probably not going to fly.
Mike, can you tell us so you just mentioned the MUTCD, can you tell us what that is and how you use that?
That's a manual of uniform traffic control devices. And they're coming out with a new one. I wasn't on any of the panels that have reviewed it, but it dictates what pavement markings and signage you can use anywhere with roadways, bike paths, etc. So while there's some flexibility in there, a lot of the newer type pavement markings and signage that you see just are absent from that manual. So hopefully some of that stuff will get into that manual with this new version.
Great. And then Sue asks, what is the process for improving an existing roadside lane safety-wise?
So are you talking? I guess we're talking about a bike lane that's on the pavement that may not be protected. So the process there would be to, provide a suitable buffer and or protection. The trick would be taking a suitable amount of width from either a traffic lane or moving the curb and gutter to shift your bike lane over and create the 2 or 3 feet buffer you need to put some type of vertical element there to protect the bike lane.
And she's wondering who can initiate that?
I would say whoever the jurisdiction that controls the roadway would be the first stop. You know, I would reach out to them and say, hey, what are you thinking? You know, we want to do this. Do you support it? Do you hate it? How can we move forward? And, you know, for anybody who's on this call, you can, you know, Maggie, you can share my contact information. You can reach out to me and give me a call with specifics, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions, specific questions.
We have a question here from P. Smitty, wondering like what a substandard width is when it relates to using designed roads where bicyclists and car and truck drivers use the same lanes. So kind of commingled traffic for both auto and bicycle modes.
You know, there are two modes of thought for that. The official IDOT stance is you need a minimum of 13-foot lane for shared bike and traffic. I think 14 is preferred. They want 13. But, you know, there's another school of thought that, you know, make it narrow and the cars just have to wait their turn and the bikes travel with the cars, and the cars don't pass the bikes, you know, and that would be applicable more in, you know, a low speed urban setting where you have very slow car traffic and probably a lower volume of car traffic. But the official answer is 14 preferred, 13 minimum.
And is that inclusive of parking lanes as well, or is that exclusive?
Exclusive of parking lanes.
Okay.
Yeah, you'd have another 7 feet there for a parking lane minimum.
Let's see there was one question I think we missed from Fatima, but Fatima, you might need to explain it for me. You say side paths near highways. Why so long when humans create walking trails?
Well, I'm talking about the side path in the Riverdale multimodal plan, and we've been working to try to get, you know, in Riverdale where individuals walk, you know, make these grooves, you know, like animals.
Yeah.
We're working on the side paths and it just simple sidewalks. What's so hard about, you know, I appreciate the way the engineer, he was talking about, you know, everybody working together, just putting the sidewalk when you create the street, you know, and when people need it. That's what I was really, you know, I'm sorry, I'm typing in.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean,
about, really.
if you
So I'm
look
working on
at
some things, and we in Riverdale, and we connect with we have the Major Taylor Trail, the what's that, the other trail that's connected, I can't think right now.
Burnham Greenway, probably.
Yes, the Burnham Greenway on the east, and then the other one, the in the Grange, the oh, I'm sorry, they're gonna kill me, but the one that's going through Orland and Markham and through the county. So I'm sorry, but we're trying to connect, and we're right at we stop right at the train track on Indiana. We have a lot of trains, so you're hitting the key points. That's why, you know, I'm, you know, trying to figure out what can I do or what can we do better to you know, get the city.
Why don't you call me, Fatima, offline, and we'll help you out with that. Get you pointed in the right direction and get you connected to the right people, and maybe come up with a concept drawing for you.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And I do work with Active Trans. I am a member, so they are
Great.
the ones that really got me involved. So thank you, I appreciate you. Thank you.
Let's see, I think we made it through all the questions in the chat. So Mike, if you want to continue on with the rest of your presentation, and we'll see if any other questions come in.
Sure. So these are just some projects that we've recently completed that, you know, I'll zip through and maybe discuss a challenge or two. So this is the Evanston bikeway that I talked about. It's a two-way protected bike lane along Northwestern's campus. I already talked about, you know, how important advocacy was for this one. But in this particular stretch, you had 18,000 cars, 1,000 cyclists, and 10,000 pedestrians along with a bunch of transit riders, commingling in this corridor every day. So we used a road diet to create some space for this two-way protected bike lane. And this was one of the better projects I've worked on. I always say, you know, never swing for the fences, but this was a home run. You know, usually we're hitting singles, we're making small connections, you do little pieces here and there, but every once in a while you get lucky. So this was a good one. To the left there is the Lake Cook Road multi-use path. That's along Lake Cook Road through the Botanic Garden. Some of the challenges there, as you can imagine, were tree protection. You know, we wanted to be very sensitive to not destroy any trees and create a aesthetically pleasing trail there that works with the Botanic Garden. This trail continues and actually had a crossing of the UP Railroad. And as I discussed, the challenges associated with that were such that we went ahead and built 95% of this trail and then stubbed it into the street prior to the crossing and built the crossing separately just to keep something moving and something built. The other one to the right is the Howard Street improvements. They're under construction now. This is another road diet in Niles where we're adding protected bike lanes and or side paths. The interesting thing about this one was it's an industrial area. There was no right-of-way at all. And I think when we took the project over, there were 47 parcels that we needed right-of-way from. So, you know, we were looking at years of acquisition. They had federal money sitting there. So rather than acquire right-of-way, we narrowed the road. We didn't remove any lanes, but instead of 4 12-foot lanes and a 16-foot median, we went to 5 11-foot lanes. And then we used that space behind the curb to build a side path. And I think we were down to 10 temporary easements by the time we were done. And that allowed the project to get under construction. And that should be finished up next year. Makers Park shared use path. This is a very small connection from MCCD's Prairie Trail into a industrial area of Algonquin called Makers Park. The biggest draw in Makers Park is a brewery called Scorched Earth Brewery, and cyclists were having a terrible time trying to get from the Prairie Trail there to this outdoor brewery. So, you know, we built this 300, 400-foot path. They got us into this industrial area and eliminated the need to go out onto Algonquin Road and try to get in there. Sandridge Bike Trail. This was a great trail for the Forest Preserve District. It connected the Burnham Greenway to the Sandridge Nature Center, 2 miles. Turned out great. The biggest issue here were trees. It was through the Forest Preserve. Cook County Forest Preserve was very helpful. Their resources unit and us walked it, set an alignment, surveyed it, walked it again, bid it for construction and walked it again. So they're constantly making trail adjustments to avoid tree impacts. Pedestrian bridge replacement and realignment in Palatine. That wasn't one of my projects, but that was primarily local funds. So we were able to construct that very quickly. The Hunley Road bike path, well, it looks not very inviting. Before we built the bike path, there were no pedestrian or bicycle facilities along 47. And this connects Del Webb to kind of Huntley's business district. And we've seen a lot more traffic on it than I would have expected. So it really turned out to be a great success. Black Road Trail, I think this came up in Will County's update. We've been working on this for years to get across 55 and the river. It should finish up next spring. There was a lot of coordination with IDOT, as you can imagine, trying to get this bridges over I-55 and also over the river, but it would provide a great connection. And this is one of those things that our life would have been a lot easier that when they built this Black Road Bridge whatever, 15, 20 years ago, that there was enough width on it to provide for ped and bike facilities. But that's just not how things were done then. Summit Drive resurfacing in Schaumburg. These are just adding standard bike lanes. Pretty simple project. What I would suggest to municipalities and advocates about a project like this, where it's primarily paint, this may be one that if you can fund it locally and not go through the federal process, you probably save yourself a lot of pain and suffering. Because at the end of the day, the construction costs associated with paint and pavement marking doesn't really, there's no return on investment for going through the federal process. Quentin Road bike path, just another side path to get people out of traffic. We have several Oakton Street side path improvements. And the exciting thing about this one is Morton Grove, Niles, and Skokie all got together and planned this themselves, so that the path doesn't stop at municipal boundaries. So there are some advantages, big advantages to that, in that when you go for funding, you have 3 villages that are partnering instead of 1 village. The routes make sense. There's not, path ends here. So this is a really good project that is in phase 1 right now. Des Plaines River Trail, we're working on the phase 1 for that now, and aggressively pursuing funding. That's been going on for the last year. There's several areas where this is underwater 60% of the year. You can't get through there. So we've developed an alignment that stays dry and crosses all of these major structures, either at signalized intersections or with overpasses. And I will say advocacy was very, very important with this project. This project was started with Active Trans and some of the local mayors forming a working group on determining just how do we get this thing built, So all the mayors along the trail, along with Active Trans, kind of got this movement started, got federal funds for the phase 1 engineering, are banging the drum right now for more state and federal funds to design and construct pieces. So this is a great example of a project that wouldn't be anywhere near where it's at without advocacy. That's it. Any additional questions? I'm happy to stick around.
Mike, I have a question about road diets, because I feel like I get questions about road diets often from suburban advocates. Can you talk a bit about when is it possible to do a road diet with the daily traffic volumes, and does a traffic study need to be done, and what needs to go into that?
Yeah, sure. Roughly speaking, I would say 15 to 18,000 cars is probably your break point for needing more than 3 lanes. That said, we did a road diet on Lawrence Avenue, and I think there's 26,000 cars a day. But in that instance, the road was already 3 lanes on either end of a 1.5 mile section, so it just didn't make sense to open it up. You definitely need a traffic study, and it's pretty robust traffic study, but the way I always present the results of the study aren't, the level of service of the intersection goes from a C to an F. What I look at is, listen, we've got a 2-mile corridor here. In the current condition, it takes 7 minutes to get through there. With the road diet, it'll take 7 minutes and 45 seconds. Are those 45 seconds worth it to be able to construct a bike facility? And most people will be like, yeah, if it's only 45 seconds, I can live with that, So there is Sheridan Road in Northwestern was a road diet. As I said, Howard Street was a road diet. Madison Street and Oak Park was a road diet. Lawrence Avenue is a road diet. So you can get them done, but they require a lot of analysis. And I think, you know, the communities that are building the facilities are communities that are willing to take a little additional delay to serve all the users. That's important.
Mike, we have a question that's a follow-up to road diets. Just for clarification for those users, for those who are attending who don't know, John is wondering if a road diet takes out an existing lane to place bike and ped lanes.
Yes. Yeah, usually the classic road diet is when you have, say, 4 vehicular lanes, 2 in each direction, and you remove one of those lanes to go to a 3-lane section. So you have 1 lane in each direction and a center turn lane, and then you use the additional 12 to 14 feet to provide a some type of bike facility. Now, the added benefit to the road diet is you've got that turn lane now, so that reduces left turn accidents and rear end accidents. And you've also shortened the distance for any pedestrian crossing the road from whatever, 44 feet to 30 feet, you know, so the shorter crossing distance for pedestrians. So road diets really make the road safer for all users. I think that's a pretty well known at this point. I don't know that you'll find many people that will dispute that. The trade-off is there may be some delay, and it's just how much delay are you willing to live with to make your road safer?
Great, thanks, Mike. Another question from Sue. Could we get your presentation so advocates can share the second part of your talk with others?
Sure. Yeah.
Great. We'll make sure to share it then with everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, you know, feel free to call me directly. You know, it's not like we're a big corporation. You call the number and ask for me, and I'm on the phone. So
yeah, we'll distribute Mike's contact info too for everyone. Let's see. We have another question from Chris. So self-funding paint and signage is a great idea to keep government funding out of the picture. Are there some ideas on how much that would cost per mile?
Yes. I don't know that right offhand, but again, I can provide those numbers. But it's not a lot. I mean, if you're painting the lanes all green everywhere, or something like that, you can run into some real money. But the latest, I think, trends are people are only using the green paint for conflict areas, and even they're using it dashed. So you're really just looking at white line paint and signing, you know. And in many cases, the public works staff can do the installation.
Great. Well, I think that I don't see any. Oh, no, another question. Brian, do you want to take this one?
Sure. So we got a question from Charlie. They're wondering if there are any guidelines for bike traffic volume for recommended facility. Examples, bike lane, PBLs, side paths. And do road diet traffic studies typically include bike and pedestrian counts?
Yes, I would say almost all the multimodal projects we work on these days include bike counts. And there is specific design criteria for projected bike volumes. But I would tell you, getting to projected bike volumes is a very difficult thing to do. You know, it's the chicken and the egg thing. Say you want to put a signal across any route to allow a bike path to get across there. And if you go to the MUTCD and look under warrants, you'll have to have so many pedestrians. Well, nobody's crossing it today because there's no way to safely cross it. So how do you prove that when you open your facility, you have a volume that's suitable to warrant a signal? We had this situation where the Skokie Valley Trail crosses Gulf Road in Skokie, which is a current gap in the Skokie Valley Trail. And we were able to look at the volumes on the North Branch Trail just west of there and project those volumes to the Skokie Valley Trail and say, hey, we can expect at least the same or greater volume on the Skokie Valley Trail as we have on the North Branch Trail, so it warrants a signal. And to their credit, IDOT actually bought that argument, and a signal will go in there when we build the Skokie Valley Trail across that section. But it's difficult to do. If the North Branch Trail weren't there, we'd be, guessing how many people. Now you can use population and business and, come up with some projections, but it's really hard to prove those.
Great. And then Ginger Wheeler has a comment. She says, thank you, Emily Anderson, who I'm guessing works at Christopher Burke Engineering.
Yep, Emily's in our phase 1 group. She's awesome.
Yeah, so Ginger is part of the East Branch DuPage River Trail group, the advocacy group. So she thanks Emily and thanks you for a great presentation.
Oh, thank you. And I'll tell Emily, so she's awesome.
Great. All right, well, I think that's all for questions. Thank you, Mike, so much for all of this great information. I feel like I learned a lot. It was a lot of very rich in detail, and thank you for always being so generous with your time. We all appreciate it, I know.
Well, thank you for listening to all of my engineering jargon. And please feel free to call me or reach out any way you'd like for any help on any type of bike facilities. As I started out with, we're very into bike commuting and we're just not looking for clients. We're looking to improve bicycle facilities. So please reach out. Great.
Well, thank you. And I hope you all have a good weekend.
Hey, Maggie.
Oh, yeah.
Maggie, hey, yeah. It's Patrick Smith. Chris, I wanted to show you what I'm seeing when I measure out that 14 feet. And this is why I was asking. So there's my bike. I drew the line on the side of the road. That's not 3 feet. I mean, my bike's pretty much on the line. That's not 3 feet. And the vehicle's over here. The mirror is pretty much on the 13-foot line. There's no way. Even at 14 feet, it's hard. So this is what we're challenged with. The design of the roads, the engineers at the state, certainly, but you've got to help them. That's not 3 feet. This is less than 3 feet between the vehicle and the bike. That's why I was asking the question. That's why everybody's got these questions.
Yeah,
and I appreciate your help.
13 feet is tight.
Doesn't add up. It doesn't add up.
Yeah, I guess if I have the choice, I would narrow the width and not, if you have a shared lane, I'm completely okay, especially on a residential street, to put the bike in the middle of the lane and have the car wait, because it's really difficult to provide enough width in both directions for a shared use path. So if you get to 15 feet, then you can do a bike lane. You can do a full bike lane and you don't even need a shared lane. So, the shared lanes are some of the trickiest applications to use. And my personal opinion is that if I'm more comfortable with them sharing the same space than riding side by side as you're as you're showing me in your picture, because nobody's comfortable when a car, zips by them. I think the understanding is with that 13 min is that, the car's going to cross the center line when it goes around the bike. Or the hope is,
They don't.
yeah,
But they
well,
don't.
yeah. The downside of making the requirement wider is we don't put down sharrows anywhere because the roads aren't wide enough. And then you're just out there on your own, like you are today. You're on a bike route.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear the perspective. I appreciate you sharing it. Thank you.
Oh, sure.
All right, well, I put Mike's email in the chat, but I'll also make sure to send it out so you can get in touch with him. And again, thank you, Mike, and we appreciate you. And yeah, hope you all have a good weekend and hopefully see some of you at our Suburban Advocate gathering next.
And Maggie and Brian, great job all week. You guys have done yeoman's work getting all this put together and lining everything up. And it's come across great. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
100% Maggie right there.
Oh,
100%
well, big thanks to Brian for helping with all of this and teaching me how to use Zoom. So, all right, thank you all. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks.